Good afternoon. My name is Etienne Toussaint. I'm a law professor at the University of South Carolina School of Law, where I teach courses related to business law, political economy, and critical theory. I previously submitted written testimony discussing both the origins and meaning of critical race theory to help clarify some of the confusion generated by these bills. I felt compelled to further testify before you today as a member of the legal profession, which calls me to serve as a public citizen with a special responsibility for the quality of justice in our laws. Although these bills are unlikely to overcome the presumption of academic freedom in higher education, rendering, for example, law school as safe from these bans, these bills nevertheless will impose a strong chilling effect on the discussion of social and racial injustice in educational settings more generally, especially at the elementary and high school levels, a form of censorship that I must publicly protest. Given my time constraints, I will only make two observations. First, when viewed in their totality, these bills stand on shaky legal grounds. In general, these bills seek to target educational content that might make students feel discomfort, guilt, anguish, or any form of psychological distress because of their race or sex. Educational content that might convey that a student, by virtue of their race or sex, is inherently racist, sexist, or oppressive, whether consciously or unconsciously. Yet, such concerns only resound when viewed through what the late American novelist Toni Morrison called the white gaze. In other words, if we are genuinely concerned about student well-being, one must also question whether certain students might similarly feel discomfort, guilt, anguish, or any other form of psychological distress when discussions about their racial or sexual identity are deemed inapplicable to public education and thereby stripped from the curriculum. To put it more bluntly, are some students already experiencing the traumas that your bills seek to avoid? Do the racial makeup of public schools, or the funding and resource disparities across public schools, or the existing curriculums of public schools in South Carolina already convey to students the tenets of superiority and inferiority that you are seeking to overcome? Indeed, it was this same fear of social stigma that animated much of the legal discourse around school desegregation, leading into the Supreme Court's decision in Brown v. Board of Education. Have we yet to answer the charge of Brown in South Carolina, much less the charges that you have brought forward in these bills today? If we do not distinguish students based upon their racialized identity, we may never know. If teachers are not trained to assess how their pedagogy might be influenced by cultural biases that cut across racial divides, they are in fact ill-equipped to answer the very challenges that your bills ask them to pursue. The Supreme Court has already ruled that elementary and high school students have First Amendment rights to receive information on a wide range of topics from a variety of viewpoints. 4 decades ago in Board of Education v. Pico, Justice William Brennan declared that schools may not remove books based upon narrowly partisan or political grounds because that would amount to an official suppression of ideas or censorship in violation of the First Amendment. So a fundamental question then is whether the impetus to ban the 1619 Project, for example, is premised on political grounds, or whether the book contains certain themes that are deemed inappropriate for minors. Of course, in a digital age where information is readily available on the internet, taking books off the shelf may only entice students to pursue them elsewhere. A better strategy, in my opinion, would be to teach students how to wrestle with and make sense of America's complex and discomforting history toward forming their own opinions and ideas.
Mr. Toussaint, do you have questions from the panel? Representative McDaniel.
Thank you. You know, I'm trying not to ask questions today, but you just took me down the road, and my little colleague over here may not be so happy. But I listened to your presentation, and from the hearings that we've heard, some of the sentiments around the bills we've been told come from how the teacher, or what the teachers may be telling the students to make the students feel discomfort, such as it's your ancestors' fault, or they are to blame, or those kind of things that will cause children to go home and question their parents about those uncomfortable incidents that happened in our past history. So with that being the concern, how do you reconcile that with the actual content of these bills, in your professional opinion?
Yeah, I think that's an important concern. However, if that is the aim of these bills, and I think quite frankly, they fall short for a lack of clarity in their drafting. The bills, in fact, do not preclude teachers from doing what you've stated. They merely preclude teachers from teaching students that it is inherently due to their race that that outcome would persist. And to me, that sort of alludes to the way that these bills misinterpret the goal of critical race theory more generally. In fact, critical race theory in its essence is antithetical to the notion of something being inherent to one's race. The project of critical race theory is to articulate the indeterminacy of law, or the sense that there is nothing inherent. What we see in society is a manifestation of the voices that dominate in political and cultural discourse. And I think teachers sort of providing students with the information to understand that history is not the same thing as teaching them that they are inherently to blame for the outcomes that they learn about. So in some way, the bills do not address that very fear. Yet the bill will create a chilling effect because individuals like yourself and others believe that it does. So teachers and parents, out of fear, the same kind of fear that you've just expressed, will avoid conversations about race, sexuality, and the like, because they're not sure what they can or cannot do under this bill because of its sort of, for lack of a better phrase, poor drafting.
And Madam Chair, may I just follow up with quick?
Yes, ma'am.
So what do you think that we could possibly put in place to reach common grounds with individuals who have possibly mistaken what their concern is with these bills when it's really something else?
Well, I think what these bills are seeking to do is put up a wall. In other words, it's trying to prevent certain kinds of conversations from entering the classroom. But the presumption there is that these conversations do not already persist in deceptive ways, which is to say, I can overtly call someone inherently racist, or I can implicitly call someone racist by aligning their sort of identity with certain structures in society. So I think in place of setting up walls, we need to create bridges to provide conversation and talk about what is in our curriculum, talk about what kinds of training do teachers have, how do we facilitate discourse, rather than leaving things off the table, talk about what's on the table and talk about how to have uncomfortable conversations. It actually does our children a disservice to tell them that they should avoid discomfort. Discomfort is a part of being human, especially being human in these United States of America, where our history is perhaps the most discomforting of all histories in the world, but that's just my opinion. And so I think teaching students how to have these uncomfortable conversations, exposing them to different points of view, and then helping them to come up with their own ideas and opinions is the best way to create critical thinkers. That is in fact the project of critical race theory, to create critical thinkers who can then look to law and think about how to reform law, evolve law, and move law to a space where we can all experience the liberty and equality, the fundamental principles upon which our Constitution stands.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes, ma'am. Representative Trantham, you had a question?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Just curious, you mentioned having discussions about sexuality. At what age do you think that it's appropriate for a teacher to have those discussions with a child? Or do you think that that's something best left to be handled at home with their parents?
I think that's such an important question. I think there is not a clear-cut answer. There's no cutoff. I think different students mature and evolve at different ages. I can recall in pre-kindergarten, I had a crush on a girl. That doesn't mean I fully understood sexuality, but it does mean that perhaps my parents and maybe even my teachers who observed certain behaviors needed to pay attention to those things and be in conversation.
Mhm.
And so I think the wrong approach would be for teachers to avoid the topic full sail, because then they're not able to provide parents with the information they need about what they're observing in the classroom. Certainly, I grew up in the South Bronx, and certainly by the time I hit fifth grade, kids were having sex.
Mhm.
And were teachers unable to have those conversations with parents or to talk to those students about what they were observing? Well, quite frankly, they're not doing their jobs. And so I don't think there's a set cutoff, but I do think that school is an environment where teachers need to be able to have those conversations in a safe way. And I think creating a bill that sort of speaks to how do you have those conversations in a safe way rather than setting up a wall is the approach that we should be having.
So you believe, and I'll just give you an example. I have a friend right now. She does have a daughter that's questioning her sexuality, and she doesn't want her daughter to have those conversations with the teacher. She wants to keep that at home. If, say, for instance, she wasn't getting that from home and she wasn't getting the support she needed, are you saying that teachers should be able to fill that gap without the parents' permission?
Certainly, I think parents should have permission to sort of be involved in their child's education. And I think all education is local, right? And so teachers need to be very attuned to the parents, the wishes of the local community. However, fundamentally, right, to be able to address that issue, there needs to be dialogue. There needs to be the conversation happening. And were we to create a bill that puts a wall in place, then teachers are going to be afraid to even approach that parent to sort of have that conversation about how best to create that learning environment. I'm not saying that there should be a class where all students sit down and sort of talk about these things. I'm not an expert in sort of elementary or high school education, but what I am saying is that there needs to be conversations about how to address those issues, or some of those students will fall through the cracks, right? Parents will be afraid to mention to their teachers how to address this, but teachers more fundamentally will be afraid to come to their parents or speak to their students. And if a student doesn't feel that their teacher is their advocate, we're going to see that ripple into their performance in the classroom. And it can have other impacts and the kinds of traumas, right? The guilt, the anguish that is embedded in this bill. If we care about that, those things are going to be felt by those students as well. So the main point that I tried to emphasize in the beginning, this bill talks about guilt and anguish, but it is fundamentally through a singular lens, what Toni Morrison calls the white gaze. But if we think about the non-dominant student, the student who is questioning their identity, their lens matters as well. And so we need to create an educational space where all students feel empowered to have those conversations and no students feel disempowered to sort of present themselves, to develop their personal identity, to develop their personal integrity, right? Their self-esteem, and then to experience social esteem so that they can have a fully integrated personhood, right? The substance of their dignity, which is ultimately what we're talking about.
Thank you.
Representative Travis Moore, you had a question?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to make sure I heard you correctly. Did you just say that the history of the United States is discomforting and it's the most discomforting of all countries?
In my opinion. Right? I'll scale back because I think it doesn't do us a service to try to rank ourselves as a country, so to speak, among others. I think all countries around the world have struggled in different ways. And I think we sort of tiptoe down the road of American exceptionalism to try to question, well, maybe we come out ahead of this country or that. I think fundamentally there are aspects of our history that are discomforting. There are aspects of our history that are very empowering, that have opened up doors for people that have overcome different challenges at different moments. So, I will scale that back. I think there are certainly things that we can be proud of, things that we are maybe not so proud of, and other countries that we can look to and say they have some things to learn from us. But also, I think we have some things to learn in some ways from some other countries too.
All right, thank you.
Representative Morgan.
Just hypothetically, would that statement that you made, which is an opinion, valid or invalid, who, I'm not going to say, but would that statement be something that you made, that be something that a teacher should make in class and teach in class? In
Which
your
statement
opinion,
specifically?
that the history of America, you just said it, is the discomforting and the most discomforting of all in world history.
Well, let's just fully explore what I said. I said in my opinion, and I think that is in fact what teachers should model in the context of a classroom conversation where students are learning how to have critical discourse, which is that we can look at history, express opinions, and then talk about how our opinion about what happened in history makes each other feel. How does that relate to our current day experience? And so what we modeled right now was a kind of critical discourse where he challenged my view, and I was able to grow from that by acknowledging that he had a great point and then responding. So this is the kind of exchange that critical discourse allows within the educational environment that perhaps this bill.
Well, and I actually I think you're exactly right, and I would completely say that this is the exact right time for that kind of discourse to happen, which is why we're having these hearings. I think that the workplace and a conversation among adults, that should always be the case, and I do think there's absolutely a place for it in the classroom. But let's say that conversation went slightly differently, and you didn't say in your opinion, and you said the statement that you made, and a teacher said that. Because I guess my thing would be, I know obviously people believe that, and rightly or wrongly, they might start asserting that in the classroom. And you mentioned the chilling effect. So I guess my question in this would be, because I keep hearing that over and over again, the chilling effect. And I am concerned about language in some of these bills that might have a chilling effect on good instruction. But chilling effect is not always bad, especially if indoctrination is going on, right? Don't we want a chilling effect on indoctrination and people, peddling political and cultural and religious views of indoctrination in the classroom on our students?
Certainly. And I think that is the space for a sort of informed training for teachers to be in conversation. And there's language in the bill that precludes it. I mean, there's one line here: a student, administrator, teacher, staff member, other school or district employee may not be required to engage in any form of mandatory gender or sexual diversity training or counseling. I mean, if you don't have a platform to be trained to avoid some of those slips, as it were, then you're sort of setting up the situation that you just described.
I agree.
Okay,
No
thank
question.
you so much. Representative Smith, did you have a question? None? Okay, thank you so much
Thank you so
for your presentation. We appreciate that.